The NFL offseason is taking way too long, so today I decided to do a way too early NFL Power Rankings video. Let's begin. So as you guys can see, we have our tier list set up right here, starting off with the S tier. These are of course going to be your top of the line teams. Then your A tier, same sort of vibe, just slightly under S tier. B tier, good team. C tier, not so good team, kind of average. D and F are obviously bad teams. Starting off, we have the Arizona Cardinals, and I'm going to put them in the D tier. Now, I do think the Arizona Cardinals are going to be a better team next year than they were last year. But with that being said, I also really don't see a world where this team can get up to like 10 wins. I think this is a first step process for them to eventually get back into becoming a playoff team. Last year, they were a better team under Jonathan Gannon. This year, they'll take a step forward, probably get like 7 or 8 wins, but not be good enough to make the playoffs or not really be an average team. I do think that offense, though, is going to be pretty fun. Next up, we have the Atlanta Falcons. I'm going to put them in the B tier. Now, I don't really know quite yet what the upside is for this Falcons team, because I can see a world where the Falcons are either A, going into the Super Bowl, or B, completely missing the playoffs. They have so much talent offensively speaking, and now they actually kind of have a decent quarterback. I do wonder if the defense is good enough to keep this team afloat. But I do personally believe in Raheem Morris, so I think the Falcons will be one of the better teams and probably the best team in the NFC South. Next up, we have the Baltimore Ravens. I'm going to put them, it's in between S and A. I'm going to put them in the S tier. My reasoning behind that is I think they're probably the second best team in the AFC, just off the top of my head. I could be wrong. Maybe the Texans are in that conversation, but I kind of think the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens are like the two top contending teams within the AFC. I could definitely see a world where Baltimore makes the Super Bowl this year. The question becomes, can they reach that upside, and can the guys like Derrick Henry make this team a better team than they were last year? I sure do hope so, but we'll have to wait and see. They're going to be in my S tier though. Next up, we have the Buffalo Bills, and kind of similar to the Atlanta Falcons, I can see a world where the Buffalo Bills miss the playoffs completely, or they make it to the freaking Super Bowl. They got so much talent offensively and defensively, but they did take a couple of steps backwards in my opinion after losing a lot of big name guys. I still think they're one of the better teams within the AFC though, so I'll put them in the A department. Kind of think whenever you have Josh Allen and a lot of really good players alongside him, you should be in the A category. I don't really know if the roster as a whole is A tier, but I think Josh Allen by himself carries that team up to that A tier status. Next up, we have the Carolina Panthers. Now, I'm going to have to put them in F, but I actually do think good things are going to be coming for the Carolina Panthers next year and years beyond. I like Bryce Young. I like Ja'Tavion Sanders, Jonathan Brooks, a lot of their offensive weapons, Xavier Legette. I think their offensive line took a lot of steps forward, and I love Dave Canales. I just don't know how that's going to work out all in one year. I don't really think this team is going to win more than like maybe 6 games at most, maybe a couple more if they're lucky. So with that being said, I don't think they're going to be ultra competitive to be making a playoff spot, but I do think they're going to take a nice step forward from where they were in Bryce Young's year number 1 to where he's going to be at the end of year 2. I actually like the Panthers. I hope they actually do figure their stuff out. Next, we have the Chicago Bears. I'm really wanting to put them in the C category, but I have a lot of faith in Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, so I'm going to move them up into that B tier category. I think they have one of the more underrated defenses in the entire NFL, and if Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze and that offense can click and be efficient and have a good surprising offense next year, I would not be shocked if that team is to make the playoffs. I'm not going to predict them to make the playoffs in this instance, but I do think with Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift, an okay offensive line and a really good defense, then I think that team has the possibility of making a lot of noise next year. I think they're a slightly above average team, which for me moves them into that B tier category. Next up, we have the Cincinnati Bengals, and I'm going to move them up into that A tier category, just right ahead of the Buffalo Bills. I think kind of like the Buffalo Bills, they took a couple steps back in certain position groups, but I still feel like as a whole, that's a very good unit. And as long as Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and those stars can stay healthy, I got the utmost faith in that franchise and that team to make a lot of noise. Hopefully come playoff time. Again, it really does depend on if Joe Burrow can stay healthy, but if he can, I got a lot of faith in that Bengals franchise. Next up, we have the Cleveland Browns. Now, I'm going to have the Cleveland Browns as one of the top contenders in the AFC when this whole offseason is over with. I think talent for talent wise, they're up there with a lot of other teams. Unfortunately for them, the AFC North is pretty stacked, so they're going to be behind the Ravens and the Bengals in my opinion. But I do think as a franchise, they got a lot of things going for them. My only big question mark is Deshaun Watson. If Deshaun Watson could be a top 10 quarterback next year, he might be able to win it all. If he's not a top 10 quarterback, if he's just what he has been or below average, we're talking about a team that might just make the playoffs, but probably be a first or second round exit. So I'll have them in A with the possibility of moving up to S depending on Deshaun Watson and what he's able to do next year. Next up, we have the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I do think the Cowboys are going to make the playoffs next year. I think they're going to be a really solid offensive team and defensive team under Mike Zimmer and Mike McCarthy's systems. I don't think they're going to win too many playoff games though. So with that being said, I do think they're a little bit limited in terms of what their potential can be. I'm going to move them at the top of the B tier. Again, I think they'll easily probably win over 10 games next year and probably cruise to make the playoffs. I don't know if they'll win the division or maybe make it second place and make the wild card, but I have faith in Dak and CD and all those guys to at least make the playoffs. Now, will they win a playoff game? At this point, I don't think so. Denver Broncos, I'm moving them to F. I don't think there should be any question marks there. It's probably the current worst roster construction-wise right now. I don't think that they're necessarily in a bad position per se. I mean, they kind of screwed themselves over with Russell Wilson and that whole situation. So I kind of feel like they're in a right spot given what they've been going through. Getting Bo Nix, I thought was a questionable pick, especially when there's so many roster holes when this team needs to fill. But I also did understand it because you need to have a good, competent quarterback in order to win in the NFL. We'll see if Bo can surprise people this year, but I don't think the Denver Broncos are going to be all that special. Next up, we have the Detroit Lions. Probably, as of today, my favorite to win the NFC over a team like the San Francisco 49ers. Now, if that doesn't happen, I wouldn't necessarily be shocked because the NFC is a little bit top-heavy with teams like the Eagles, the Rams, the Niners, the so on and so forth. Maybe the Seahawks can get in there, but I think the Lions right now, to me, are the top dogs. I think that they have a good chance of making it to the Super Bowl next year and maybe winning the whole thing. On those same lines, sticking to the NFC North here, we have the Green Bay Packers, another team that I think is really going to be awesome next year. I'm going to move them in the A-tier category behind the Bengals. I do just trust Joe Burrow a little bit more than Jordan Love, and that's just because I've only seen a very small sample size from Jordan Love. I've seen enough from Joe Burrow to know that he can make it to the Super Bowl. I think the Packers as a roster have a lot of really good younger and older talent to go along with a lot of really good coaching staff members, and I think that team as a whole has a very good shot of winning the NFC next year. Now, can they get over the San Francisco 49ers and over the Detroit Lions? We'll have to wait and see, but I definitely do think that they have a good shot at it next year. Next up, we have the Houston Texans, and as it sits right now, I would probably say they're in the third or fourth best team in the AFC, so I'm going to have to move them in the front of the A-tier category, and that's just simply because I don't think roster-wise they're quite yet up to par with the likes of the Chiefs and the Ravens. But I will say this, with CJ Stroud, a decent enough offensive line, some really good weapons, and an improving defense, I do think that Houston Texans team can seriously compete with any team in the AFC. Right now, I don't think they're the best team in the AFC, but I think they can easily win this AFC conference, more than likely be super competitive with any team out there. Just right now, I can't quite put them in that S tier category because to me, the S tier category is saved for teams who I think are the favorites to win the AFC/NFC. And right now, I don't think the Texans are quite yet favorites, but they're definitely leaning into heading into that position. Shout out to the Houston Texans, man. I have a lot of faith in that team moving forward. On those same lines, sticking to the AFC South, we got the Indianapolis Colts, and I'm going to repeat the same phrase I've talked about multiple times. I got a lot of faith in this Colts team to be really good next year. That being said, I'm not going to be delusional and move them into that A tier or S tier quite yet. I'm going to have them in the B tier because I do think they're going to make the playoffs next year, and I do think they'll be ultra competitive with basically any team in that conference. That being said, I haven't seen Anthony Richardson come playoff time quite like I have with CJ Stroud and a lot of the other teams in the A tier category. Again, I have a lot of faith in Anthony Richardson. I have a lot of faith in Shane Steichen, Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, and so many of their other players. But I can't quite yet move them into that A tier category. They're going to be a sneaky good team next year and competitive with basically every team in the AFC. So they're my B tier. Next up, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they're going to be my first team to enter into the C tier. I have a lot of question marks about this Jaguars team, starting off mainly with Trevor Lawrence. If Trevor Lawrence can be the MVP level quarterback that we want him to be, this team has a really high ceiling. Now, what that ceiling is more than likely a second round or third round playoff exit, but still, that's a pretty high ceiling. But I think that their floor is relatively low, especially when you look at their schedule, which is a pretty tough schedule. I have them going somewhere probably between 8 to 10 wins next year. I haven't done a video on the Jaguars, but I'll have one out probably eventually at some point. So I'll have them in that C tier category. I do think that they're probably the third, maybe if you're stretching it, the second best team within their division. So we'll have to wait and see, but I don't think they're going to win the division. I think they'll be average to slightly above average, and maybe they can make a playoff push, but I don't know. The AFC is pretty crowded. Next up, Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I don't think there's a lot that has to go into this conversation with the Chiefs, but I do want to at least mention the positives with the Kansas City Chiefs, because I feel like whenever we do these tier list videos and whenever I see YouTubers doing similar content like this, they kind of just glance over the Chiefs and just instantly put them in a category when they don't really give any context to it. I think the context is pretty simple. That being said, though, they won the championship last year. They got better this offseason. Yes, they lost out on their cornerback and L'Jarius Sneed, but they brought back basically everybody and equipped guys like Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy to the tool set that Patrick Mahomes already has. That team is going to take such a big step forward next year. They already have one of the best defenses and one of the best offenses, and their division, quite frankly, isn't that difficult. So they should be able to run through that division. They should be able to run through the AFC. I will say I do think teams like the Texans, Bengals, Ravens, Browns, Bills, so on and so forth do present very difficult challenges for a team like Kansas City, but right now, as it sits here today, they are my personal favorite to make it out of the AFC. Could I be wrong? 100%. They've been going through a lot this offseason, but I think when it comes down to it, they'll all collect all their personal side issues away to go out there and try to win a football game, and I think the Chiefs will be fine next year. Next up, we have the Raiders, and I'm also going to be moving them in the C tier category. I do think they're going to be a good team next year, and probably a pretty competitive team at that. I do believe in their head coach, and I do believe in a lot of the pieces on this franchise. I just don't really think that Gardner Minshew is the type of quarterback who can go out there and carry a team to a playoff spot. I think the team in general is ready for a franchise quarterback. I think that next year they should go all in on one and continue to build around and refine certain blemishes on this roster. But if they can go out there and get a top tier quarterback, keep an eye out on the Las Vegas Raiders. They could potentially be a team that's similar to the Atlanta Falcons, where they're just kind of a quarterback away. I think the Raiders are building to getting to that point. Next up, we have the LA Chargers, and this is probably the hardest team to put on this list because, quite frankly, they can be a playoff team or they can completely be one of the worst teams in the NFL next year. I don't think they will be the worst team in the NFL per se, because I have a lot of faith in Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert and a couple of their other pieces, but I still think this roster has a number of big-time holes they have to look to address in upcoming off seasons. I mean, starting running back right now is not that impressive. Got a couple issues defensively. I don't love their defensive line. I don't love their linebackers, and I don't love their secondary. I also don't love the interior of that offensive line, but I still think there's enough good players to carry this team to being a pretty solid team next year. I'm going to have them in the C tier category, and that's just simply because I believe in Herbert, and I personally believe in Jim Harbaugh. That being said, I don't think they'll get over 9 wins next year. It's probably between 6 to 8 wins and being a pretty competitive team with everyone else. But the division they're in, and it's going to be hard to beat a team like Kansas City, and it's going to be hard to beat a lot of the top tier AFC teams. I don't think that Los Angeles is quite yet there to make that deep playoff run or to even make a playoff push. But maybe next year or year after that, they can make that push to make the playoffs. But I don't think it's this year quite yet. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Rams, and I gotta say, I'm starting to every single day become more and more of a Los Angeles Ram believer. I love Stafford, I love Cooper Kupp, love Puka Nacua, Sean McVay, and so many other pieces. I think their defensive line is really developing into one of the better units in the NFL. Secondary could use some work, but it's still pretty solid all around. You brought in Tre'Davious White alongside Darius Williams and a couple others. Secondary wise, it's okay. It's good enough to get the job done. I also do think the offensive line took some steps forward this year. You got Stafford. Just stay healthy. Just stay healthy and be consistent. They're going to be a playoff team, and they're going to be a force to reckon with within the NFC. That being said, I will put them behind Green Bay. I had to make that quick little adjustment. Next up, we have the Miami Dolphins, and they're kind of in a similar boat to the Cowboys, so I'm going to stick them right next to Dallas. I think they'll be an awesome regular season team. They'll probably destroy every single bad team, and maybe they'll win a couple really close ones against some good teams, but when it comes down to it, are they going to go into Arrowhead or Baltimore? Are they going to go to Cincinnati and win a playoff game when it might be cold, or even doesn't really matter the conditions, but when it comes down to it, are they going to win a playoff game? Kind of don't think so. They maybe could win 1, maybe 2, but they're probably not going to be good enough to win at the AFC Championship level. I think this team has a big high floor, but also a relatively low ceiling in comparison to where their floor is. Like, I think their floor is probably like 9 wins, which means at worst they'll get 9 wins, but I think at best maybe 12 wins and a first round exit is kind of what I'm thinking. So they're in kind of the same boat as Dallas. That's still a good team, by the way. It's just that they're missing a couple pieces. And I just don't know quite yet if Mike McDaniel and Tua Tagovailoa can get the job done when it matters most. Kind of like the Dallas Cowboys with McCarthy and Dak. I don't know if they can get the job done when we get into these super highly contested and physical playoff games. Next up, we have the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I actually like where the Vikings are heading as a franchise, but I don't believe in JJ McCarthy quite as much as I do with a guy like Caleb Williams. So I am going to move them into the back of the C tier because I think they're going to be a very good team, but very good in terms of just getting to being maybe 500. Like, I think they'll probably be 8-9 or 9-8, which to me is kind of the definition of just being average. They got a lot of good things going for that franchise, but until JJ McCarthy can develop into being one of the top tier quarterbacks in this league, their ceiling is a little bit limited. Again, I think the franchise is heading in the right direction. They just paid Justin Jefferson, finally. That's a good thing. Their team in general is really stacked, honestly, from head to toe. It's just that I think JJ McCarthy right now is going to have to get a little bit carried through his rookie season. And if Sam Darnold does play a lot of snaps this year, then obviously your ceiling is a little bit limited because you don't have a top 15 quarterback until JJ McCarthy or maybe Sam Darnold can prove to be that guy. But because I have really no intel on how good that team will be, I'll move him on the back of C tier. I kind of thought about D tier, but I don't think they're going to be a bad team. I think that they're going to be a good team with just an inconsistent young rookie quarterback like a JJ McCarthy or Sam Darnold. So New England Patriots, they're kind of on a similar boat to the Denver Broncos. I will put them in front of Denver, but that's just simply because Jacoby Brissett and Bailey Zappi by themselves can probably win more games than like a Bo Nix. And that's no offense to Bo Nix. He's a rookie quarterback with a bad roster. That's just the truth of the situation. But for New England, I don't think Drake May is going to get too much playing time this year. I think the roster in general has a lot of holes, both offensively and defensively. And I think the coaching staff's going to need some time to kind of get used to being, well, a coach. Gerard Mayo's never been a head coach before, so it's going to take some time for these guys. They are a rebuilding team for a reason, so I think that they have a good chance of being arguably the worst team in the NFL next year, which is a good thing. You're rebuilding. You need to get high first round picks so you can take a top tier receiver or tackle or, edge rusher or whatever this team might be heading for in next year's draft. Just be bad. It's okay, trust me. Next up, we have the Saints. I'm really tempted to put them in D tier, but I think that Derek Carr and this franchise is good enough to at least be average. I'm going to put them in between Las Vegas and Los Angeles as sort of like that middle ground of being like, hey, we'll probably go 8-9 or 9-8, and then next year we will wipe our hands clean of Derek Carr, our head coach, and so many other positions and coaches that this team needs to get rid of. I think as a franchise, I kind of see what they're doing. They're probably just going to suck this year, just be mediocre so that it can eventually get off of some of these bad contracts and bad head coaches. Like, I don't think that this team is seriously trying to contend, because if they are, they're doing a really poor job of trying to contend. But I think they're purposefully getting guys who may be able to be there for the long run, such as like a Chase Young, who might be able to stick around for the next 4 to 5 years. And eventually they'll get off of Derek Carr. Maybe Spencer Rattler plays this year. I don't know. They'll just be an average team. Let's just be honest. New York Jets, they are also a tough team to put in here because they could be as good as the best team in the league, or they can be as good as about average. But I will probably put them somewhere in the middle. I'll put them in the back of the A tier with the Buffalo Bills. I have faith in Rodgers to come back from this injury because he's Aaron freaking Rodgers. He's somebody who I have to kind of have faith in, but he's 40 years old with a torn Achilles, and this roster has a lot of other players who are kind of injury prone. Mike Williams, Tyron Smith. That's a little bit concerning, but if they can stay healthy, that's a top 10 defense, that's a top 10 offense, that's a solid enough head coach, and an MVP level quarterback. That's good enough to get the job done. But until I personally see it on the field, and if they can make a full 17-game regular season where they have no injuries, then maybe they could be an S tier team. But until I see that, for now, they're an A tier team. I think you guys can understand that. New York Giants, they will also join the Arizona Cardinals in that D tier. In fact, I just made a Giants video, so I won't talk about them at all. I'll have it linked up at the very end so you guys can check out that Giants video. I go into a lot of really good detail about why I think the Giants are kind of doomed from the beginning and they're going to be bad probably once again. Next up, Philadelphia Eagles. I have a lot of question marks with this team. I really do not believe in their offensive coordinator, and I don't really believe in Vic Fangio. So with that being said, I don't like their coordinators, I don't like their head coach, but I love the roster in general. I think the talent by itself could easily have this team up into this category. But until I see those coordinators actually put the game plan together to get that team through a deep playoff run, I don't really believe in the Eagles to be a good playoff team. And that's just simply because Kellen Moore has been horrific in postseason adventures. Look at those Dallas Cowboys offenses going up against the San Francisco 49ers when Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator. It is some of the most incompetent football coaching I've ever seen. So until I see Kellen Moore make a deep playoff run, I don't know if that team is going to be all that good come playoff time. Again, I put them in the front of the B tier because I think that team could easily win 14 games next year. And that's not even a slouch. That's a big time achievement. But when it comes down to it, do I think they're going to win 3 playoff games with Kellen Moore? As of today, the answer is no. But maybe come the wild card weekend or whenever they play their first playoff game and they go out there and they smoke a team, then hell, I'll eat crow on that one. But until I see Kellen Moore put together a competent game plan in the postseason, I don't believe in this team to be Super Bowl contenders. But like I said, I would not be shocked if they won 14 games this year. That's pretty damn impressive. Pittsburgh Steelers are up next. I'm going to put them in the B tier between the Falcons and the Bears. I think this roster has a couple holes. I don't necessarily love the receiving core. I'm just not a huge believer in George Pickens, but I think it's good enough to get the job done. I'm also not a huge believer in Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, but I think it's good enough to get the job done. Defensively, they're pretty good. They just signed their head coach to a 3-year extension. We'll have to wait and see if that one works out. But I think the team is good enough to at least maybe make the playoffs, but in a loaded AFC, it's going to be super difficult. So I have them in the back of B tier. I think they'll be a good team. I don't know about necessarily being a great team next year, but they could make the playoffs if things do go right. Next up, we have the San Francisco 49ers, and I will also be moving them up into this S tier category. I do have some question marks about this Niners team because they've kind of had a hectic offseason, but regardless, they've still been able to kind of shore up some of the issues, and they've been able to keep guys like Ayuk and Debo. We'll see if that sticks around come regular season time. I think the Niners are a good team, but are they quite the best team in the NFC? As of today, I'll say yes, but that's just simply because they did it last year, so what's stopping them from doing it again? But again, are they better than Kansas City? Right now, no. Will Detroit be able to surpass them? Probably / maybe. We'll see. The Seattle Seahawks are up next, and I am personally a pretty big believer in Geno Smith and this offense in general. But with that being said, I don't think they're going to be better than teams like Miami, Atlanta, Dallas, Indianapolis, or Philadelphia. So I'm going to move them behind those guys and just in front of the Bears and the Steelers. Could they make the wild card? 1000%. Are they better than the Rams and the Niners, who are both teams in their division? Not yet, but they could get there at some point. As you guys can see, there's a lot of really good teams in the league. A lot of these being NFC teams, so we'll have to wait and see if they can make the playoffs, but I think they can, and I think they could maybe make some noise. Next up, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and if you watched my quarterback tier list video, you guys would know that I'm not the biggest believer in Baker Mayfield. He was in my D tier category, but I do think this Buccaneers team is good enough to be average at best. Again, maximum 10 games, at worst like 6 games, but more than likely they'll probably hit around just in the middle with about 8 or 9 wins. I think the roster in general is pretty okay. It's, like I said, pretty average, which to me is what the C tier category represents. It's just an average team that I just don't know quite yet if it has the potential to make a deep playoff run. Yes, I know they beat Philadelphia in the playoffs last year, but that Philadelphia team is a lot better this year, and it won't happen again unless Kellen Moore puts together a disaster class in the playoffs, which could happen, but I don't think it will. Tennessee is up next, and it's the second to last team before we get to Washington, and I think Tennessee could be a pretty fun team next year. I'll move them right next to Jacksonville, but that's just simply because I don't know right now if they're better than Jacksonville. Right now, as it stands today, it's kind of a coin toss to me because they have a lot of good talent. Still some issues with the offensive line, and still not like the greatest defense in the world. And I'm not the biggest believer in their head coach, but if everything does go smoothly next year and Will Levis takes a step forward, we can maybe be talking about Tennessee making a wild card push. Now, will they in the loaded AFC? Probably not. But if they can get the good Will Levis season and take some steps forward, if they can continue to build that offensive line and build that defense, maybe they could. For now, they'll be towards the top of the C tier, but I don't want to give them too much credit and say they're going to be making the playoffs next year. I think that's a little bit unrealistic after just kind of a one-year rebuild process. And last up, we have the Washington Commanders. I have kind of enjoyed what they've been doing this offseason, going out there and basically configuring the whole roster all over again because the roster last year was pretty bad. Are they an F tier team? No. Are they the top of the D tier though? Yes. I think that they're going to be a fun team, a team that maybe can win 7 games next year, but I still have too many question marks about, number one, do they have enough of the high level talent to contend with some of the NFC teams? 2, can Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn in year 1 be good enough to carry an average roster to being pretty good? And number 3, can some of their guys stay healthy? We'll have to wait and see, but Washington to me is the best of these bottom teams, and I think they have some potential to maybe move up to this B tier, but until I see it on the field with all the question marks this franchise has, I'm going to just keep them in the D tier for now. But let me know in the comment section below which teams I got wrong, and if I got everything right, make sure you hit the like button, and if I got everything wrong, make sure you hit the like button. But I love you guys. Peace.